Okay, so yeah, Lean Hangout or Lean Coffee works on the form that we write down topics I want to talk about, that we want to discuss, and then we upvote them. We do dot voting, and the ones with the most votes, I mean, we are 3 people, this will be fairly easy. The ones with the most votes get discussed for like 5 minutes, and after that we do the Roman choosing, yes or no, to continue or to break the topic off.
Okay, sounds good. Let me first try to fix my my camera problems.
Take your time.
I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Okay. Is anybody else joining us?
There were a few people, but they they bugged out in the last minute, like Candice and Sergey, and I don't know. There are a few other people on maybe, but let's see. I just tweeted the link, and we'll see what happens.
Okay. So actually drinking coffee?
I'm drinking coffee, as a good developer should.
Guess what I'm drinking?
I know. Maybe you can tell from my eyes. I had a little bit of that last night.
Okay. No, the camera's not that good.
Great.
Okay.
So I'm fixing up a Google document that I can share with you guys, so we can put our topics in there.
Oh, okay. Use FX. How do you send messages here? You don't.
That should be better.
Yeah.
Ah, Yannick.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Hi, hi. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Good.
Perfectly fine. So let me just share a document. Google Drive.
Does that all appear in this window?
Yes, it will. Give me a second. I'm figuring out how this works. DDD Lean Hangout. That's so. Give access to all the people. Sure, sure. So you should see the file now.
I need permission, so I asked for access.
You need permission?
Yeah, he came and said to me, you need to ask for permission and send a request to you. So.
Ah, yeah, give access. You should have access now.
I think I can see it. It's empty, right? Yes, I can see it.
I see nothing.
Awesome. Hold on. What did I do to see it? So I press on Google Drive, then you have like a small arrow on top left.
Yeah.
If you open that one, there should be a file, DDD Lean Hangout.
Okay.
If you press that, it should open.
Cool.
Okay.
So it should be just on the video window, and I can even type on the video window. Everything's fine here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I see Yves in the document, and I see Yannick too.
Okay.
Great. So let's just write down some topics, one per line, and let's take 2 or 3 minutes for that.
Mm-hmm.
I would go with my all-time favorite, event storming.
Whoa. Each choose a line.
Okay. Okay.
Sounds great.
Okay.
You guys don't have any more of?
Oh well, if we think of any at one point, I guess we can elaborate a bit, extend the list now.
I was going to say the same thing. If we think of any subjects that we can discuss, we can add them later on.
Yeah. So let's say we have 6 topics, 3 people. Everybody take 2 points and vote on what you want to discuss.
Okay.
Or let's take 3 and say you can choose multiple on one if you want.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I like that one too. Three.
And I have a third one. I'm done?
Mm-hmm.
Think so.
Okay, perfect. So our most important topic of the day is versioning and messaging. Let's start with that one in a minute. Then we have same importance for ubiquitous language and natural language. Then comes difficulties in modeling from the trenches in the DDD community. And then event storming and messaging. Okay. So versioning and messaging. Let me just put on a 5-minute counter. And this was Yves' topic, I guess?
Yeah.
So you want to start explaining what this means?
Yeah, I noticed lately, well not lately, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of discussion about how to do versioning. On one end in say event sourcing and using events, on the other end in messaging. And basically I was curious how other people have tackled this, because I'm not really there yet. I have a good idea of what it is, but I really can't put my finger on well, it's not really putting my finger on it. It's more of I don't really have any real world experience with it, and so I want to know more about it. That's really the key point I wanted to make with the versioning. So I was more interested in what other people had done with versioning, how they dealt with it, and what they found good or bad about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can give you some of my experience. We use versioning for the events that we store in our event store.
Mm-hmm.
And we have 2 different kinds of versions in the metadata. We have one version of the global version of the event store.
Yeah.
So it's just every time you put a chunk of events in there, like you have 3 or 5 events coming from home aggregate, they get version number 1 and the next one gets version number 2. So you can tell, okay, when did this came in? It's not depending on the timestamp, it's just this is the next chunk of events that came in. Well, the trade-off is you need to make sure that there's only one writing process, or that the event store at least makes it serial and not in parallel, the writing. Otherwise you would get messed up numbers. And yeah, the good thing is that on a read model side or on any projection side, when you get some events and you see, okay, the version is too high, it doesn't matter which aggregate they are from or whatever happened. You just see, okay, this is version 2000, and the last thing I got was 9000 or 1900 or whatever. Then you can just ask specifically for those missing in between and get them sent and can project them. So this is working fine. And I have the second one, the aggregate version that I store in the metadata. This is for the right side. So the specific aggregate, no matter where in the whole stream of all the events it happened, the specific aggregate knows this was my first event, this was my second event, this was my third event. And this is working pretty well for a not changing program, for if you just have a simple domain and you work with it. But I've noticed some difficulties when you change events in the future.
That's
So,
exactly one of the things I noticed as well. And somebody, well, some guy on Twitter complained about it. It was an Italian guy, I believe. Had more to do with the upcasting of events. And what's upcasting? Upcasting is really the act of, well, it's like adding a column to a table, or changing the data type of a column, or spinning off an entirely new table. Well, in event sourcing, you have either you dismiss the original event because it's not important anymore, or you split up into multiple events, or you have a one-to-one mapping where there's an old meaning and a new meaning, or a slight change of name, or an append of some field. And I think the difficulty is within the going from one event to multiple events, that and how you deal with versioning at that point. I mean, you go from say one event that's at version 13, and now you make 2 events out of those.
yeah.
From my perspective, those are both still version 13. It's the way we projected one event into multiple events that's okay. That's a thing I can picture in my head how that would work. I mean, I can go from one event and go to 2 events and have them in my domain model and use those now. That's not going to be a problem. But the downstream systems, those are still going to receive either the old event, or I'm all of a sudden going to send them 2 events where they were expecting 1 event. And so there's in the downstream systems, there's also the added...
We have a timer situation.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that was the thing.
I haven't said anything yet, so yes.
Okay.
So 3 minutes.
So the downstream systems also have another problem, is that they talk in different versions. I mean, you're not going to upgrade your entire system in one go. Your downstream system might talk version V1 of all your messages, and now you're saying, well, now I'm talking version V2 of all my messages, meaning that some of those messages may have become upgraded. So there's that added complexity that happens there as well. And so, again, a question, did anybody deal with that kind of versioning in downstream systems?
Well, I haven't dealt with it, but I'm starting on a project where we have thought about that for a bit. We haven't had any epiphanies yet, but I do recognize that, well, versioning in that sense, it offers a lot of complexity depending on how you deal with it. What you were talking about earlier when you said, well, splitting up an event into 2 events, would that remove the previous event completely from your domain, or would you, I don't know, consider those version 2 of that same event?
Well, it wouldn't. I mean, it would remove it from my perception of the domain before, and I would go into this new perception I have, hence why these 2 new events came about. Just for argument's sake, it could either be split up into events but keeping the old one and having an extra one, or it could be 2 entirely new ones, where because we have to look back at the motivation for splitting up into multiple events. The motivation is often is that you didn't fully understand, or that your granularity at which you were exposing the event was too coarse-grained, and now you want to go finer-grained and have this this different nuance in there.
Okay, and how would you deal with the 2 minutes?
No, it's fine.
Okay. How would you deal with like an extension or something. Let's say you have an event with certain data. At a certain point, new data comes into that event or is relevant. How would you deal with that?
Well, I would suppose that now we're going into the area of how do I deserialize an old event into, a new event into an old event where I'm basically disregarding the newer data. I just would assume that I pick a serializer that that deals with that.
Mm-hmm.
So like Google Protocol buffers or...
Yeah, sure. But that's interesting for the systems that still speak the old event. But let's say your system, it speaks the new event and the old event alike, or do you just deal with the new event, or do you have a backwards compatible new event that has optional fields? Maybe some fields aren't as optional. You added a new mandatory field onto your event. How does that work?
If I added a new mandatory field?
Yes.
Well, let me bounce the question right back. How would you deal with that in a normal database situation?
Well, typically, I guess you would have a sort of depending on the situation, but typically you would go and calculate maybe a value that is okay for all those old situations, perhaps, given the data that you have. But in a append-only event store, I don't really see you changing the old data. So.
No. Well, that's the point exactly. You're not changing. When you load up the old event, you're then and there projecting it into new events.
The logic there.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Just for making it clear, when I was talking in the beginning about versioning, I did make myself clear. I was not referring to this kind of versioning. I mean to the versioning that Marco was talking about with the version of the event or the version that you put on the... I was more talking about the thing we talked about in this last few minutes, where you change the schema of your event or of all your events within your domain. Okay. Anything to add? Otherwise, maybe close down this topic.
No.
For me, nothing.
I'm out of questions. So we have ubiquitous language in natural language.
Yes, that's one of mine. It's my only one, for now at least. So basically the idea is that, I think we touched on this subject a little bit at the IDDD tour, and the thing is that we have a couple of projects where we have a number of different stakeholders that speak different languages. So basically the domain experts speak different languages. And, well, from the olden days, let's say, when we didn't really think that well about how we would go ahead and develop software, we would map everything just to English or whatnot, keeping options open for eventual outsourcing, if that were the case, to, I don't know, India, where English is better known than Dutch, for instance. But I was wondering, how would you deal with domain experts that speak different languages? Would you try to consolidate and agree on a single language, being one of those languages that the domain holders experts speak? Or would you try to figure out ubiquitous language in a third language, like English, one that everyone speaks? Or is it dependent on situation? I don't know.
Well,
that's basically the setting of my question.
Yeah, I would say it depends, as always with these questions. If you have like a multinational customer base, then you don't really have a specific use case that is fine-grained in one language. So if you, for example, use Word or so, it's just, it's a very simple example of the software, but if you use something like Word, everybody uses it, and there's nothing specific in Dutch or Belgium or German or English about word processing. So you can use a common language that everybody understands, and basically that would be Spanish, English, or Mandarin, depending on where you live in the world. And if you have a very specific thing, for example, shipping, this whole shipping thing from the Blue Book, it's a very complex case, and there are multinational. It's a multinational thing. There are many nations involved, many languages involved, and this whole industry evolves around a specific language. They have either they have a language that they speak, or they have mapping between those translations. And then you should choose the language that's best for the domain experts that you have at hand, or the developing team that's working on it.
Right.
If you have a purely German developing team and you have a Dutch customer, then you should choose English maybe, because everything else would lead to disaster.
Yeah, you need some kind of common ground. But in our case, we have, well, Belgium is a bit weird in that sense, because we have French, we have, well, French-speaking, Dutch-speaking, and German-speaking stakeholders. And that's like a normal scenario in Belgium. If you write software and you try to have the whole country as a potential market, then, well, you need to think about the domain in the different languages. And basically the domain is expressed in those three languages. There is some kind of mapping because, well, the legislation is the same, the rules are the same, but, well, I guess the nuances are often lost even when talking to developers that speak the same language. And if there's mapping, I mean, into a third language, it seems like a bad idea.
You can make it. You could make it very explicit, where you basically made the mapping a visual thing, where you you have your team working on it and make it very visual of how these different terms map to one another. Maybe have a glossary in those several languages, and have some sort of map drawn between them, so that whenever you get a requirement or you talk to someone and you need to, and you capture it in their language and you need to consolidate it, that you are able to refer to the glossary as a way to perform the mapping. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy. I think if you have different stakeholders speaking different languages, it's always going to be subject to the nuances of the culture, the language. I mean, even Dutch-speaking Flemish people have a slightly different culture than French-speaking people on the other side of the country. So I think you're better off making things very explicit. So having, for example, the Dutch terms, the French terms, and the English terms.
Okay, sure.
So that's from a point of how do I consolidate these things.
Yep.
And then there's, I think, is a third thing, or a second thing is, now what are we going to write in code?
Yeah, that was going to be my second question. Yeah. Exactly. So it seems like when writing codes, you're typically already doing a kind of mapping. You're mapping some concepts to the language that the code is in, which is typically English. But I don't think that's a good enough reason to throw away the language of the domain. And in the example that you gave, let's say that we have a couple of different languages. I guess it might be a better idea to choose one of those languages instead of choosing a third language that none of the stakeholders speak, like English in this case specifically. I don't know what your ideas are on that. Marco, I see your code is typically in German.
Yeah.
What are your experiences with that? Have you ever done it just purely in English, or?
No, yeah, we just wrote everything in English back in the days when we weren't doing domain-driven design or any kind of pattern. But since we found language as a very important thing to talk about with customers and to implement in code, we chose a simple way of saying everything that's technical term, everything that we just use for the sake of making a program or a software work, we do it in English. And everything that's domain specific, we do it in German. And this gives a very good distinction even when you have like overlapping words. There's very often something like a store, you want to store something, you want to store data, so call it store. But if you want to store something in the domain, put it in a shelf like that, then you say the German words, and you don't get mixed up with all the expressions. That's pretty effective.
Yeah, makes sense.
But we have a different problem. We have customers in Austria, and Austria also speaks German, but they use some words in a different sense, and so we're getting into these problems right now. Yeah, so I have no solution yet. I'm just doing a visual mapping, that's all.
Okay.
Well, we've been operating in an international market for quite some time now, and we found that that doing it in English and keeping a mapping for ourselves was the easiest way. What I mean by that, well, the team is Dutch, and the customers are French, German, Norwegian. I mean, there are even some countries in Eastern Europe that use our software, and so there's no real way to keep everything in all of those people's languages.
Yeah.
So what we decided was keep it in English, but for the team to English.
I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to decide now because he says up, I say down. It's your choice.
Right.
Okay. Well, I think Yves is still talking, so I'm gonna let him finish his sentence at least.
Okay.
Okay. So what I was meaning was we just have a mapping from Dutch to English, where we might use those interchangeably because we've been doing this for like 13 years, and when you've been in it so long, you only need a half a word to understand each other.
Yeah.
So that was a good fit for us, doing it in English and Dutch.
I guess in some way you guys are domain experts of your own a bit, or working in that same context for that long time. I mean, I've only worked in a lot of different contexts really, but over the last 2 years I've switched projects and businesses for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 times already. So getting any kind of depth in knowledge is difficult in that time span. But over 13 years.
And you can only do this because there's a certain depth to the domain, because otherwise you
exactly.
And there's a certain breadth to the domain. And so yeah, that's another topic, I guess. The fact that that we can keep going in such a thing.
Okay.
So, question answered.
Yep.
Next topic is difficulties in modeling from the trenches.
Yeah.
That was this topic.
Yeah. So I guess on one level you have a lot of difficulty in getting the how should I say this? Getting the technical story right. I think a lot of developers should share that, and just viewing all the questions in Stack Overflow just acknowledges that fact, or even getting what domain-driven design is all about, or how to do it. But then there's an entire other problem set, is that how do you model things? Why did you choose to model it this way or that way? So the kind of difficulties that arise in that area are more about how do you translate the problem to code, basically, and how do you come up with classes if you're in a class-oriented programming language? How do you come up with classes with not so much with the names for those things, because you can feed back to the model, but to the language, but you may have a name for a certain thing in your model, but there's code behind that, and there could be a lot of code. Not all things are simple, and you can decouple all you want, but at some point you're going to feel difficulties in how you model those things. I just wondered if anybody else had experienced the thing I just talked about, or how they dealt with it. If you want, I can give an example if you want.
Let me just ask if I get this right. So it's not about the modeling of the domain, it's the modeling of how the code should be structured and what technicalities you would use to do your solution. Is that what you mean?
Not entirely. It's more when you're struggling with difficult problems within the domain itself, how you structure those.
Okay.
I think what you're hinting at is there are there any best practices, given that for programming and changing requirements we have these solid practices, these solid patterns, let's say, of good software design, and if you structure your program that way, refactoring will be easy. I think what you're asking is, are there maybe any ways to do that with respect to the model? If you model your model in a certain way and you want to evolve or transform at a certain point, are there any good ways of doing this that you don't need to rewrite everything? Is that?
Yeah, that's a pretty good comment.
Okay. Well, honestly, any good insight is not going to come from me, because I'm asking myself that question every day. But maybe Marco is going to surprise us here.
Yeah, I have no real experience, or not a lot of experience in that, but I heard a talk from Sergei Shishkin last year, and he talked about functional architecture, and it's not about functional programming anyhow. It's he tried to model real-world problems into technical solutions by just finding analogies to the real world. So he wrote down what we knew on a paper. He said, okay, we have customers, and he draws some customers up here. And he said we have, like, I don't know, a musical database, and people want to hear music, so we have our music here. And okay, what do we need to get this from there to there? And then he just started with the basic assumptions all the time, like, okay, you need some kind of data transfer, so the internet would be great. And then it was like, okay, but we have one server and 2 million people that want to listen to stuff. So what should we do? We should, I don't know, get more scalability on the read side, blah, blah, blah. And he just drew more and more and more of these things without any technical terms on them in the beginning. It was just, okay, we need something that spreads, and we need something that aggregates, and we need something that delivers, or whatever. And after he was done with this, and he said, okay, this is what we need in a functional way, in the analogy of the real world, this would happen. Then he thought about, okay, what can this be in technical terms? If I got him correctly, I mean, he's not here, so he cannot complain. But that approach worked very well for me a few times in demo mode. I didn't try it in a company. Okay.
So, 1 second, guys. I hear the girlfriend vacuuming, so be right back.
Okay, we will wait for you. There should be an intermediate game somehow. Yeah. We should play Tetris or so in between. Okay. So it's Sunday and you're drinking beer at not even 4.
Yeah.
I'm kind of jealous. Ah, you're back again. Hi, Yannick.
Hi.
So time starts. Well, this way of functional approach with analogies from the real world works very well in demo mode. I never tried it in an actual workplace, but it's very easy to see what you need without computers. Just what you need as kind of a structure to build stuff, and then put some names from patterns or classes or whatever in there.
Okay.
question is still open, I think. But I doubt we're going to find a really good answer to the question because it's a really complex one. I mean, we've been trying to solve that problem for code ever since code has existed, and I think solid is a great way to start, but we're not entirely there yet. Same thing for modeling. The problem there is that the complexity is just a lot bigger. Yeah. So what was the name of that guy? Sergey Shishkin?
Sergey Shishkin. He's also in this group. He wanted to join today, but something came up and he had to back out last minute.
Okay.
But you can Google plus him up, and he's on Twitter as Shishkin or so.
Okay.
I'll post it I'll post you in the comments.
Awesome. I'm definitely gonna check that one out.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah. Okay. So besides a solid take, just do small things that are exchangeable. I think that's the best way of solving this. And then you can build small parts, and you can improve on that later. Yeah, I have nothing more on that.
No. That's the difficulty, is building small parts. In the sense that we have a lot of functionality that has to do with. So basically, you want to change, for example. It's difficult to talk about without going into a lot of detail, but basically you want to change how you've set up things and then have that reflected in the real world. Let me give you an example of that, because otherwise it's not going to make any sense. So say I'm a doctor and I'm working from, I don't know, on Mondays from 8 to 12, and I do this every 2 weeks because I work at a particular location at that time. And then, so I set up how I work this way. And then I change my mind, or maybe there's another opportunity for me, or I want to do this more frequently, or there might be all sorts of things. There might be all sorts of things that that might influence this. So not only am I dealing with the complexity of how am I going to satisfy his wishes of changing how he works. What am I going to do with all the outstanding work he has, because as a doctor, in our solution, you schedule appointments for that doctor. So all those people are planned to come to the hospital or to his practice to have their appointment, and it's not because he says, well, I'm going to change how I work, and work has already been planned. So you need to deal with that situation of how are we going to deal with that. But there's also the added situation of where there's this requirement that comes along and says, well, I'd like you to show in the user interface to the doctor, when he's changing his schedule of how he's going to work, how many appointments will be affected by that, so that he can make an informed decision whether he's going to go through with that or not. Or he might take another decision at that point in time. But the logic to make that decision and the logic to actually change the way he works is I mean, 90% is the same. And that's what I mean with difficulties. Is that how are you? Those are the kind of difficulties that arise of how am I going to share this? How am I going to keep these parts of the model separated from each other, so that when changes come to either of those areas, because they might evolve in a different direction, how am I going to deal with that? Versus, well, I might get a lot of benefit out of sharing those things, but how far do I go in sharing? So that's the kind of difficulties I'm dealing with on a daily basis, really.
And what is the effect of not sharing for you? I mean,
Well, the effect of
It's
not
extra work.
It's extra work. It's a lot of extra work, and that has to be weighed against requirements not yet known. So you try to keep it as lightweight as possible and as changeable as possible, but you can't foresee the future. So those are some of the things where you just have to make a decision and just see what you get. And
I think at any point in time in a project, when you make a decision, you need to make some kind of an assessment. Yeah. Well, for me, you can stop as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Make some kind of an assessment, and exactly. I have a tweet of a viewer, Marijn Huizenveld. He was at the IDDD tour as well, and he would like to join, I think.
Yeah.
No problem.
So I don't know if he can.
Sure. He should just go to the Hangout. No, I can invite him here. Wait. Like invite people. There's a button. His name is Marijn Huizenveld?
Yeah, I can type it in. Is this chat? I guess it is. Like this.
Okay, give me a second. Where's the chat? Oh, there's chat. Google is awesome.
It's like this.
Huizenveld. There he is, huizenveld@gmail.com. Submit.
Awesome.
So Marijn, if you're seeing this, join us.
Yes, please.
Yeah. I sent the invitation to your gmail.com account. Okay, so yeah, we're through with that topic.
Yeah.
I have another topic that I would like to add. Maybe we could do it now, so that I'll just put it at the bottom. Okay.
You can say it while you're typing it.
Okay, so basically what I'm thinking, it's not really structured yet, but the basic idea is that, like with anything, you make an estimation of how much work you want to put into this. And whenever is a CRUD a valid approach? Is that maybe a good approach to start off with and figure out things as you're going along? Do you ever do any part of your system in pure CRUD or not?
I'd say this is a topic that's started.
Yes, we can discuss it now, or?
Yeah, let's just start it.
Yeah. Okay, so we actually do. For example, we have a part of our system that's mainly about, when you look at it, it's about documents. It's about, and I'm not talking about documents where, you know, Word document or people typing things. No, it's not that. Basically, when people in the hospital choose the kind of appointment they want to book, it's sometimes really difficult for them. Why? Because, well, I can assure you, even though you're a nurse, you may not know every appointment type there is in radiology. Even though you're a doctor from another department, you don't know what the appointment type is you should book within the radiology department. So we developed this feature that's called a decision tree. And what that does is it helps you come to the right decision of which appointment you should book. But when you look at the feature as how it's developed, it's really basically a document where you ask questions. So it's really a short survey of sorts, where each answer you give goes down a different path within the overall decision-making process. And at the end of the decision-making process, there's either a message saying, you should just call the hospital and send this guy over directly, or, for example, you should book an MRI scan or another kind of scan, or he should come down for a visit first. So there's all kinds of decisions that could be made. But from an authoring perspective, from how do I build this into my software, it's basically one or two people within the hospital that decide to create these decision trees, because they are the only ones that are knowledgeable enough on how to create those. But what they're really building is just a simple document where they're adding nodes to a tree, and when you look at it, it's just a document that you save in a database and that gets published, meaning that from that point on it can be used in the software, and the document is fetched and interpreted as to which questions to ask according to what has been put into the document. And that's very CRUD-y by its very nature. There would be no point, for example, doing event sourcing on that kind of stuff, because you're not interested in how those things, who added which question. That is not important. The authoring process is of no value to the customer. What is of value is, what decision did you reach when you booked that appointment? Why did you book that appointment? So the scale of what is important is not within that piece of the model, and that's for me how you decide which kind of technique should I be using within this model. If there's not a lot of value in the behavior, then don't model the behavior and do it in the lowest stack way. I mean, we have now a very, if you would see it, it's for those doing .NET, it's plain ADO.NET we're using. Some people would cringe at that, but I mean, it just works and it's good enough. And there's a web API on top, and great. That's all that's needed. But if somebody who came with a DDD background and was used to aggregates and all this stuff would come along, he would say, "Well, you're doing it this way. That's wrong." I mean. But this hasn't. For me, this is a strategic decision. I could do it in half the time this way than I would be able to do it if I were to build a whole behavioral model about it. Because there's nothing in there that I mean, it basically putting in a document, validating the document. Is it okay? Save it in the database, and when I ask you for the document, just give it to me. That's basically. So, looking at the requirements. Are those mainly behavior-oriented, or are those mainly data-oriented? That's how I make the trade-off, and I might be wrong. I mean, but that's what I start out with.
I would totally agree there. And continue.
Okay.
Yes, awesome. So I would totally agree on that point, and I would add something. When you do prototyping, just to show the customer or the product owner something that you could implement, do it in a CRUD way, because as long as you are still prototyping, developing some kind of GUI, or just wanting to show some kind of basic behavior, if you put all the DDD effort in there and do all the aggregate design very well, this is really expensive. And even if you have a complex system where the behavior might be important, if you know that there will be no evolvement on that, if it's like a throwaway software, then it could be even a good thing to just do CRUD work on it, because once it's passed and it get paid, you can throw it away. I think this whole tactical modeling thing with aggregates and events and whatnot, so the non-CRUD way, pays off in volatile and in long evolving systems. And when you know that you have that, go for it. Otherwise, choose whatever technology or methodology is serving your needs well. And sometimes you have to hinge. You have to just guess what might happen, because you don't know from the start. Will this catch on? Will people use it? Will I have to evolve on it or not? And as long as there's uncertainty, you have a gut feeling. I mean, this is what experience is for. When you have a lot of experience, you get a better gut feeling. But you cannot make an informed decision all the time. You have to discuss it with the group, and you have more experience and other developers, product owners, and use that. Communication is a key there, and then you have a group decision, and nobody will blame you if your CRUD work was wrong, because you all decided it all together.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Basically, I think Greg Young has a blog post on this. I think he was talking about a startup idea they had or something, and this TDD, a good idea, is putting a lot of work into creating a good and solid solution, a good idea. And I think this is in the whole lean startup world. This is really big. It's like, do you want to, if you're still finding out your business, if you don't even know if it's a viable business plan, if you're going to find any customers, do you want to put in a lot of work for a product that you might not even need to maintain? I mean, back in the day when people were just coding and hacking along and creating technical debt all over the place, that worked as well. I mean, it worked. Sometimes it just solves the problem for 80%, and 80% is just fine, you know, and that 20% that's left over, you just do it manually. I mean, the strive for perfection, that's something that we, as developers, really need to let go sometime, I think. And not everything needs to be solved in one way. There's no silver bullet for every kind of problem, and that's, I think, what you're talking about as well. CRUD is maybe a bad option for complex systems and systems that have a lot of behavior, but for systems that don't, or where maybe it's even too complex to implement and you just need something now, and you have some kind of manual process that can be put in place, I think CRUD is an option. So yeah.
I just want to give another example that might put things maybe in a somewhat different perspective. We have another part of our system where the organization sets up, the organization here being a particular hospital we sold this piece of software to, where they set up how they work, and those are really, when you look at those screens, you get the perception of, wow, all these things you're showing me here are very cruddy, but yet we made the decision not to make them in a cruddy way, and there's a good reason for that. Each time a change happens in that cruddy part of the system, another part might need to change. I might change a setting, a configuration of a certain field, and that might have its effect on how that other part of the system is going to function from now on. And there it was very valuable to have this more event-driven way of working, where all of those changes were propagated out of the system and were feeding all the other systems, even though they were very simple and they were about registered new this and archived that, so that these particular things had an effect on downstream systems where they would know, okay, so now it's safe to delete this this thing we had here, or from now on we need to use this new configuration setting, because the administrative part was more of a centralized whole. So there was an example of having what basically looked on the surface like CRUD, having those downstream systems benefit from. Was that the only viable option? I'd say no. We could have used simple domain events, or or have done a sort of change log alongside the cruddy part. I mean, those are all viable options. We just chose to do them in an event-sourced way and get our feet wet with this technique. Okay, so I think I pretty much said all I had to say about this topic. So.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the next topic, by the way, Marijn is not showing up.
I saw that he was
only going to be in
read-only mode or something. Yeah.
He's not on Google Plus, he said. But there's no time like the present, I'd say.
Okay, he's not on Google Plus, but he wants to join a Hangout. I think this is a really great example of not working. Okay, yeah, Marijn, if you see this, just join Google, and next time you'll be there when we.
Well, he has a Gmail account, no?
Yeah, it should be just a few clicks to make a Google Plus account. But
okay. Just join us, dude. I mean,
the more the merrier.
Yeah. That is great.
Coming to my next question, building a DDD community. I'm seeing a big difference in the Belgium and the German DDD community, and I have a theory why that is. I mean, you guys started off like 4 months ago or so, and you had a modellathon with 45 people, and you already have the next one booked with a Legacy Inferno, and you're getting cool guest speakers and whatnot. There's a lot of traction in Belgium, and Belgium has only a fraction of the German population. And our DDD community is still really small, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 people that are active but not actively together. And the other thing I notice is you live in a very close space, and you have people like Yves with a lot of experience in modeling and a lot of activity on the DDD CQRS group, which is I think very helpful. Then you have Tom, he's kind of an enabler, Tom Janssens. He's a Twitter magician, I think. Every time he tweets something, an IDDD tour starts or a modellathon starts or whatever. And yeah, you have all those people like, I don't know, Stein and Matthias and Martin and I don't know. They are all really into DDD and into community building. But yeah, how can you spark this in people? Is there something that you did beforehand? Is it the beer that you're drinking? I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely the beer. I can say
it's the beer. So we need more Belgian beer in Germany, yeah?
I mean, you guys have good beer as well, but honestly, I think it has to do with population density and the fact that FAR doesn't really exist in Belgium. I mean, driving edge to edge, it takes you 3 hours max. So I think it's a bit that, because there's a very high concentration of people doing the same thing, and meeting up, it's just not that much of a hassle. That's my opinion. I think it's just the environment.
I think it's one of the reasons. The other thing is, I guess, why did we start the Belgian DDD community is because there was momentum there, I think, at that point in time, and yeah, it was just a moment to make it happen. I think, and honestly, I didn't think it would. For example, the modellathon, I didn't think in the beginning, and I think a lot of people didn't think it would take on this well. So there's also that aspect. I think is that there's a lot of interest in this. I mean, there's a lot of people, I think, that are unsatisfied with the way they've been working up till now in their software, whether they're doing full-blown DDD with the technical patterns, etc. I don't know, but you kind of get bored with doing the same thing over and over again when it's CRUDing. You see it fail all the time. That's another aspect, I think. So maybe I don't know. What's the developer job situation in Germany, really? How and in what kind of languages is it spread? Because personally, I think DDD is pretty high within .NET communities, and less so, say, well, I mean, it's high in .NET and Java communities, but less so, I think, within a, say, Ruby community or or other kinds of dynamic languages that focus more on front end. Well, Matthias and Marijn doing PHP being the exception, I think. But in those languages, I tend to find a different style of programming where things need to go fast and lack a lot of depth. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in the .NET community, because there's a lot of Microsoft zealots out there that just follow all those technical things that they keep putting out. And I mean, I used to be one of them. I know what it is. So, but after 10 years, you get bored of just that. And we started using more and more open source in our system. I mean, we, after Visual SourceSafe, we said never again, and I'm glad we never did TFS and stuff like that. So it's basically the environment you create for yourself. And if I speak from my own experience, it's also the employer that can create, or the management that can create this ambience for you. Because if you inspire people to let them do what they are good at, you tend to get further, and you do not only push the technology envelope, but also get your software out in a way that's, I don't know how to describe it, but it's different than I guess most job environments most people work in. And I have been fortunate to always be. I don't want to make this topic about me, but I have been fortunate to work in this environment where I've been able to go for years on one project and really get into the depth of those things. And I think that's a huge difference in what probably most of the consultancy market is doing, and probably most of the ISVs are doing, because, well, most of the time money is the problem, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is a really important point. The bosses of the software development companies, the managers, they really have to see the value of DDD, and I find it certainly difficult to explain to them what the value is. I mean, the arguments, I think they are pretty upfront, they are really easy to understand, but they are always like, you know, we did tables on MS SQL for years and relational data, and let's stick at that. And then you're like, yeah, but if you just dive into modeling with the customer, and the first reaction always is like, yeah, but you don't get the customer for that.
Then you need a good legacy system to really show your boss that I mean, we have this situation where we have a legacy system and where it's very difficult to change at a steady pace, and that really shows that you need a different way to go about it. Otherwise, you may build another system, a new system, in similar ways, but you're going to be stuck with. And maybe that's your business model. Maybe that's, and I'm okay with that if management and the boss people are upfront about that. But that's the clue. Be upfront about what your expectations are from and if these things are strategic. If they are strategic, that's an entirely different story, and let me guide you into doing things in a more sustainable way, where you might be able to not only scale your software from a performance or scalability perspective, but also from a how do I get more people to work on this perspective. And this is where DDD shines, and from my perspective, is that it's an enabler for having multiple teams work on your software, even though you may not be ready this time. But I think that is an important message to bring to the either the customer or the management, is that they will be able to scale development if they build their system not as one monolithic thing, but as multiple islands communicating to one another. Granted, there may be some overhead in doing that initially, but if they consider it strategic, I think it's going to benefit them.
Yeah, I think what you just said is one of the most important points, and I think Eric stresses on that as well. In one of the videos that you posted on the community page, or was it the group, Eric was talking about legacy systems and how DDD doesn't necessarily only give some kind of payback in the long run. It actually can help you to tackle problems that you never think you could. For instance, let's say that you have a current solution space for an old problem that you solved, and you want some new feature or whatever, and you recognize that the thing that you have now, it's crap, and you think, well, it's just better to just rewrite everything, and after a couple of years, we'll have the top of the pyramid that we can finally get our competitive advantage. That doesn't really make sense, you know. And the fact that DDD helps you in dealing with legacy systems and dealing with it in a good way, in a way that actually lowers technical debt instead of increasing it even more and making it even more impossible to do changes in the future, and having low quality in the product that you're supporting. I think that's a really big enabler as well, perhaps.
Yeah. And thing is, I mean, I've been lucky. I work in an environment where I have a legacy system and a boss that understands the benefits of doing DDD. So we're doing DDD. That's a great thing. But we're a small company, and I see so many other companies just around this place. And I want to spread the DDD idea. You know, I want to build a community around that. And I can't just walk into another company of other people and try to explain them, yeah, come on, read this book or look at these videos from Eric. People are just not up to this. Yeah, so I'm wondering what can we do as a community or as enablers, as people who want to change something? What can we do to get people interested? I mean, I can organize a DDD flash mob, but I don't think that it has a lot of traction.
Well, yeah. I think first of all, what you were talking about blogging twice last year, and that was a really good achievement for you. I think blogging is really important, and I think blogging is really important to get the word out. And what I recognized working with the German people in the past is that, well, like you guys are German, it's a world language. A lot of people speak it. You guys tend to stick to German. Is that fair, or? Yeah,
that's something that happens really often. I mean, even I have the problem with my PO. When I say, yeah, let's read something about DDD, and they are like, is it in German? Like, no.
Yeah.
Well, then just explain it to me.
So maybe that's a good idea to start with. If you want traction and people to get people interested, start blogging in German, man. Blog the hell out of German.
Yeah,
that's not a bad idea. I mean, trade-off would be. Sorry.
There may be a cultural difference there. That's what Yannick is hinting at. That you might be able to take advantage of, I guess.
Mm-hmm. It's the same for French people and Spanish people and all the big languages in the world. And I think that's one of the things that us Dutch people, we're very humble. We know we have a small language. No, not a lot of people speak it, so you might as well learn a couple of other languages. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I should ask Eric if I can translate his book.
That's a good idea.
Hey Eric, do I have the permission to translate the DDD book into German?
Don't make it red.
No, there's already a red book, so.
Yeah, true. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm done with my topic.
I'm going to think about it some more because it's a really interesting one. How do you build traction around these things? I guess being visible about it, having people. But I mean, in Germany there are people as well that are busy. I mean, you, Marco, and Philip and Dennis Traupe are doing things with DDD. Mike Bild, I think, is also one of Mike Bild.
Mike Bild, yeah.
Yeah, is also doing things in that space and a more functional space, I guess. How does the German not DDD community, but the German developer community? Is it high on .NET? Is it high on Java? Is it high on?
Yeah, it's both. We have a large large .NET community in the south of Germany and a little bit around Cologne, because Microsoft has its headquarters in Munich and Cologne. And the north of Germany, middle up to north, is mostly Java. But both are really, really big here in Germany. So there are user groups in every town, and I mean, Osnabrück even had 2 user groups in .NET and 1 in Java. And now we have the software craftsmanship movement getting traction here, called Softwerkskammer. and many user groups just mix up together there and exchange everything. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to get to these open spaces and tell people about DDD, but yeah, it's just, 50 minutes or 60 minutes is not enough to get people really interested into these things, because it is complicated. It's nothing that you can explain in like 5 minutes. I don't have an elevator pitch for DDD. That might be a great idea, actually. Yeah. Do you have an elevator pitch?
I'm actually thinking, I'm trying to work one out, because I'm giving a presentation internally next week. And I was really, I wanted to capture, how would I say it? Well, basically it's like this. You want to present a problem that everyone has always faced or is always facing, and then offer a solution, right? And offer a solution from the practical standpoint, with examples like, we did this and this happened, and that was really great. But yeah, elevator pitch, it's a complex system. It's difficult to say, well, this is the benefit, and there are a lot of benefits, but there are a lot of things you need to do and need to know about.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing of an elevator pitch is it doesn't have to be right completely, and it doesn't have to be complete. It just, if you find an elevator pitch, that would be a great thing. I mean, blog about it, because I need something where I can get people in like 2 minutes and explain to them, this is DDD, it's awesome. And when they are hooked, when they're really interested, I mean, then I can go and explain all the trade-offs and all the real benefits and the long-term goals and whatnot.
Maybe the question, when was the last time you actually built a system that was exactly what the customer wanted?
Yeah, that's provocative.
Yeah.
And I guess when I go back to the reason why did I go looking for DDD? I mean, because I actually went out and looked for DDD in retrospect. I think I bought the book in I think it was in 2004. I was heavily influenced by Martin Fowler's book on patterns and I don't know what it's called anymore. Patterns of enterprise application architecture. Yeah. So it had a lot of these patterns in there, and then Eric's book came out after that, and like most people, I read the first few chapters and then put the book on the side. And then I built a few systems, and I started to notice that not only did I have a problem with not knowing what object orientation was about, not only did I have a problem with layering and separation of concerns between basically only those layers at that point. I had not heard about Solid at that point. So it was the DDD book, the Solid book, and all those things came together at the right time. And I started rereading them, and I figured there needs to be a better way how I structure my program, how I write software, and so without going further on that, the essence for me was I was feeling pain, and my question is basically, are German developers feeling pain from feeling pain from building their systems, or are they already building them in a way that's maybe not the DDD way we perceive, but helps them build the system nonetheless in a sustainable way. So I would question that, because there's not only the school of DDD. I think there has been written about object-oriented analysis and design. So Eric Evans is not the inventor of a lot of these things. He's just the man that brought all these things together and put them in a business perspective and added some unique things, I guess, to them. So
that's a great question, and I think I will actually use that the next time that I'm at an open space. And ask the people that are not into DDD, not why. I will just ask them, do you feel pain? How do you work on your software? How do you keep it sustainable? And if they don't, they say, yeah, it's a problem. After a few years, I just leave and someone else can inherit the problem, then we can talk solution.
And how do you feel about legacy systems?
Yeah.
Because that's, well, what you just talked about is you build an application, you feel pain, you leave. But what you leave is a legacy application that somebody else is going to need to maintain. So at a certain point, how do you feel about legacy systems? Do you feel you have the necessary tools to tackle problems related to legacy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so I think topic is through.
Yep.
I'm done with it. Then the next and last thing, I took event storming out because it was the last topic and we already discussed that at a previous point. Messaging in and outside the server and services. That was my point. I'll just start the clock. Yeah, I have a problem. I'm pretty new to messaging, and the only technology I use is ZeroMQ. I love ZeroMQ. It's amazingly easy to use, and as long as you don't have to go to the internet and keep it in the intranet, it's fairly easy. You can do inner process, inter-process, and TCP, and I just JSON my objects, send them over ZeroMQ, and I have the same architecture inside of my application. So if I have one process or one thread that wants to talk to the other thread, I just JSON the things up, send them via in-process communication with ZeroMQ. And if I have to send it to a client application, I just do the same thing and just change the address from inproc to TCP. That's all I do with messaging. It's working, but I'm sensing a problem there, because if I want to add, a web service, for example, I can't use ZeroMQ. I need something else, and it somehow feels wrong to use the same approach for all these completely different kinds of things that have different needs. So, what's your way of messaging? What kind of technology are you using? What kind of methodology are you using?
I can answer that. I've been using probably a lot. I have used plain XML over TCP, custom TCP, no less. I've been using MSMQ. I've used sporadically the other queuing systems such as ZeroMQ, RabbitMQ, just to get my feet wet with them and get to to how they are structured, how they feel, how you need to work with them. Yeah. I've used things like Service Bus. I've used the whole. I followed the whole SOAP story. I think back from the day when it was still XML RPC. So when blogging just became popular due to Dave Weiner and his Radioland. I don't know if you remember that time, it was a long time ago. I followed the entire process of XML becoming popular, XSD, WSDL, XML RPC blending into the SOAP protocol, it was called back then, and the whole evolution of it all, and WS Death Star most people refer to. And I followed also the stacks around that, so like the Java stacks around doing messaging, and the .NET stacks doing messaging. So I think today, even when you want to do web services, I think we're slowly but surely transitioning into the you're better off using a web API or a REST API, and then you get into the whole discussion if your API really is a REST API, but let's just leave that. So today, I think if you want to be as open as possible and you want to talk to developers from other platforms, I think HTTP is the best protocol to speak, and layer whatever approach is suitable for you on top of that. If you really must, you can use something like WCF on the .NET side, and I'm sure there's something on the Java side that does that as well, but a lot of people complain about the complexity in those systems. I don't see the complexity, or I don't care that much about it to complain about it. I mean, I've seen it grow WCF from the ASMX stack, so the old ASP.NET way of doing web services, into the WSE 1, 2, 3, and then came WCF out. So I saw this whole evolution. So for me, it was kind of natural the way things ended up. They are, but I think there's a lot of young people came out of the schools and never had this history with regard to this this platform, and hence they rebel against it, and the whole it's taking too long, it's too enterprisey. Let's go for Ruby, let's go for Python or another dynamic language that's not going to well, let's face it, that's not this enterprisey, so it's not going to implement all these WS star things. So I think it's a natural evolution that those people said, whoa, Roy Fielding's dissertation on REST, let's go that way and use HTTP. So it's a lot more low tech, and they get their things done as well. So for me, I think, like you said, if you're in the intranet, ZeroMQ has a lot of powerful patterns, a lot of good insights about how to do messaging. You can't go wrong if you want to do messaging that way. And I think if you want to go more the route of durable messaging, use some other queuing system. If you want interoperable with enterprise systems, I think WCF or the XML SOAPway is the thing still to do today. If you want to be enterprisey but still keep a very open host, I guess the more web API way, where you use HTTP and a more resource-oriented model on top of it is the way to go these days.
What kind of serialization? Thank you. That's an amazing. My English is leaving me now.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay.
Yeah. What kind of serialization do you use, or would you prefer? I mean, I do JSON scripts with FastJSON. Actually, Philip Yander has a fork of that, and even some bugs are out, and it got quite quicker. So that's nothing. XML, I think, is too verbose. I don't like XML. I mean, a lot of people use it, and if I have to, I do, but personally, I choose not to. Yeah. And protobuf was too complex for me. I just read the definition. I was like, okay, this is kind of overhead. If I just want to send events, this is too much, but maybe there's a reason to use it. So what do you use?
Well, I use a lot of things. I use protobuf to store things, and I use JSON to transport things. But I mean, storage is pretty cheap, so I think I might be storing it in JSON to make it more readable, more discoverable, less translation happening. The thing with serialization that stands out for me is that I don't want to deal too much with translation, or I want to make it explicit. With that I mean I don't want to mess too much with the serialization per se within either of my models. I don't know a better way to express this at this point in time. But there's the type system in JSON, which basically has almost no type system, and there's this type system in .NET, which is very rich. So that's one area that's always going to be an area of problem or frustration, but it's pretty well handled, I think, using JSON, and I think JSON is the modern approach of doing things. Yet, if I wanted to interoperate with a lot of third parties that have integration engines and stuff like that, I probably would stick with XML because that's more the kind of talk that happens in that world. But that doesn't mean I have to change my my way of working in other pieces of the system. So I basically speak a lot of different serialization formats, depending on who I'm talking to or what the purpose is of doing that.
Mm-hmm. So JSON is Yves approved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we typically use JSON for all our messaging and even storing at the moment. We're using RavenDB, and I think Raven by default uses. I don't know if it even has the option to store it in something else.
I doubt it, but
yeah. Okay, that's the questions for today.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing left in store, so I'd say thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
We should do this another time. It was a great idea, Yves.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
yeah, let's
hopefully with more questions, more people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And more beer because I didn't have anything to store.
Yeah, I ran out of it too.
Yeah. Next time we should organize better. We need to define what beer and what shirts to wear and everything. Yeah. No. So spread the good news and let's see if we can find more people next month for an online DDD Hangout. Would be great to do another one.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
Fine.
It was fun.
Bye. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye.